Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our Week 15 running back video for DraftKings. There's a lot of injuries that happened in the last couple weeks and a lot of cheap running backs that are available this week. There's also a lot of guys whose roles have changed a lot over the last couple weeks due to either injury or just teams shuffling stuff around. So you are able to get some cheap running backs where you don't have to pay up, although with the wide receivers this week being pretty cheap, and the guys towards the top end not really having the greatest matchups, it could be one of those weeks where you do want to pay up for some of these running backs. You know, a guy like Adrian Peterson is always somebody who can have 200 yards rushing and get you a couple touchdowns. I think he's going to see a lot of volume this week. My biggest problem with Peterson is he doesn't normally catch a lot of passes, but if you have money left over to save, I wouldn't mind upgrading to a guy like that. But for now, I'm going to give you 4 guys who I've been looking at who look to have some pretty good volume coming this week and could be some really solid running back options for you to put on your rosters. The first guy that we're going to talk about is David Johnson at 5,700. The next guy is Denard Robinson at 4,600. Tim Hightower at 3,900. And Jeremy Hill at an even $5,000. David Johnson is the first guy we're going to discuss. He's in a game where he's favored by 3 in a high total game that has a 50-point spread, 50-point total at this point. Johnson has been averaging 24 touches as a starter per game and scoring 18.5 fantasy points over the last 2 weeks. He makes a few catches every week. He had 5 catches last week, 2 catches the week before. He was actually being used as the third down running back earlier in the season before a couple of the running backs went down with injury. So he's definitely somebody that can catch the ball out of the backfield and make things happen with it. He can run with it. He can catch it. And if he gets himself into the end zone for a touchdown, I think he can get us over 20 fantasy points this week in what looks to be a pretty good matchup. He is getting a little more expensive at 5,700, but when you have a guy with that much volume on a team that's that high scoring and, you know, projects to have a lead in this game, I still think he's a solid option for you to consider. The next guy we're going to talk about is Denard Robinson at 4,600. Atlanta has allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs so far this year. TJ Yeldon is out this week, meaning Denard Robinson is going to be serving as the primary running back down there in Jacksonville. The Jags are at home and favored in a game with a high total and a low spread. So we should see a lot of Denard Robinson, whether it be in the passing game or, you know, with him getting the carries and running the ball. He had 15 touches and 15 fantasy points last week in relief. And I think those numbers could get back up into the 20 range with him being the full-time starter now this game and the primary workhorse running back for this Jacksonville team. Jacksonville's been putting up a ton of points lately, and Denard Robinson should be somebody who gets a piece of that. The next guy I'm going to discuss, I think, is just still too cheap, especially for the volume that he saw last week, and that's Tim Hightower of the New Orleans Saints. Detroit has allowed the 8th most points to fantasy running backs so far this year, and they've given up a lot of touchdowns to running backs this season. He plays in a high total game with a total of 50 points. And again, he saw 28 carries last week as the featured back. He was in on over 70% of the snaps, while CJ Spiller played under 20% of the snaps total. Tim Hightower has huge upside at a really cheap price, and he's going to be getting big volume. I don't think he's a guy that has explosive ability. Those 28 carries, he didn't even get 100 yards out of them. But if he's going to see 25 to 30 touches, you got to respect him, especially at a price of only $3,900. The last guy I want to talk about is Jeremy Hill, who's $5,000. San Francisco has allowed the most points to fantasy running backs of any team this year. Since he should have a lead in this one, which favors Jeremy Hill being the guy running the football over Gio Bernard being the guy catching passes out of the backfield. It should be a run-heavy game plan as well because with Andy Dalton going down, since he's probably going to want to keep it conservative and protect A.J. McCarron and not ask him to do too much. Jeremy Hill hasn't had a lot of huge games this year, but he is a guy who's had 9 total touchdowns and 3 games with multiple touchdowns. I think this game is going to be staying on the ground with the game plan for Cincy. So I think this could be another one of those games where he picks up multiple touchdowns. If he gets 2 touchdowns for you, runs for 60 yards, and gets you another catch for 10, that's going to give you the 20 points. That's 4 times value and be one of the top options on the day. I do really have a lot of faith in Jeremy Hill this week, and I think he's going to have a really big game. So those are some of the cheaper running back options we think you can roll into your lineup. As I said, with the wide receivers not really being guys you have to pay up for this week, with some of them being in really tough matchups, I think that you are going to be able to go up and get some of the higher priced running backs if you want to. A guy like Adrian Peterson is somebody who stands out. Other than that, though, there aren't too many guys I really want to go pay up for. If you have a few extra bucks and you can go get maybe a Lamar Miller or LaShawn McCoy, I don't think those are the worst options either. I actually prefer McCoy over Miller, basically because McCoy is getting more volume and more carries. I also think McCoy will be a lot lower owned after everybody was on him last week expecting a huge game, and he kind of disappointed a little bit. He didn't have a bad game per se, but he just didn't have the big game that people were expecting out of him. So if we can get McCoy at 1/10 the ownership he was last week, I think he's going to be a pretty solid start this week. But there are a lot of cheap options out there if you do decide you want to pay up at the quarterback, tight end, or wide receiver positions. The guys that I mentioned are guys that I'm going to be rolling out in all my rosters this week. And I do think that you can put some good combinations of them together along with some solid wide receivers and give yourself a lot of high upside rosters. So thank you guys for joining us here at rotocurve.com for our running back videos for week 15. And as always, stay classy, DFS.